The lights blaze white against a sea of expectant faces. Somewhere near the center aisle, a hand shoots up, a voice cutting through the hum. The question doesn't sound like curiosity. It lands like a challenge. 1,000 eyes pivot toward the stage where two men sit beneath a banner that reads Faith and Freedom Summit. One of them, a sharp, voiced speaker known for his fiery sermons about strength and patriotism, leans forward, the mic trembling in his grasp. "Tell me," he demands, "how can love fix a world that's already burning?" Gasps flutter through the crowd. Cameras rise. Every lens wants the same frame. The moment belief collides with doubt. Opposite him sits a quieter figure, the actor who became famous for portraying compassion itself on screen. His posture barely moves. His gaze stays fixed, serene. He doesn't interrupt the echoing question. He simply lets the silence swell until it feels like another presence in the room. Viewers watching the live stream flood the chat with emojis and disbelief. Is he going to answer? Say something? Hearts climb the corner of the feed like sparks. The narrator's voice enters, measured and cinematic 2 weeks ago. Inside one of America's largest gatherings of faith, something happened that no one expected. A confrontation that forced millions to reconsider what belief really means in an age of spectacle. The tension hums like electricity. The speaker's expression hardens, waiting for a rebuttal that never comes. The audience begins to sense that this silence is not hesitation but intention, a calm that feels stronger than the noise surrounding it. Every breath seems amplified, every whisper magnified. A woman in the third row clasps her hands, unsure whether she's witnessing conflict or revelation. And then, after what feels like forever, the actor finally exhales. His voice, when it comes, is almost a whisper, yet it carries through the hall like thunder wrapped in mercy. The crowd stops moving. The air itself pauses. And when he finally spoke, the entire room shifted. But to understand that moment, to know why it struck so deep, we have to go back to the roots of two very different visions of faith, and the collision that was destined to happen. Rewind. The camera sweeps over a convention center that feels more like a stadium than a sanctuary. Banners ripple overhead, red, white, and gold, each emblazoned with a cross wrapped in a flag. Voices rise in waves, some singing hymns, others chanting slogans that sound halfway between worship and campaign rally. From above, the crowd is a living storm of conviction. Thousands of phones glow like votive candles. At center stage stands a man named Caleb Kerr, a fast, talking organizer whose brand of patriotism is sharp enough to draw blood. He paces with the certainty of a general rallying his troops. Every sentence ends in thunder, every pause invites applause. To reclaim our faith, he shouts, we must take it back from those who turned it soft. The crowd erupts, flags wave. The music hits a triumphant chord. For Kerr, belief is not a whisper, it's a weapon polished by confidence. He built his movement on the promise that power and purity are the same thing. His followers adore him for it. His critics fear what that promise might cost. Then the lights dim, and another name appears on the screen, Jonathan Roumie, the actor whose quiet performance as a teacher of mercy made him an unexpected spiritual icon. He isn't here to preach politics, he's here to talk about the kind of love that asks nothing in return. When he walks onto the stage, the cheers are scattered, uncertain. He doesn't command them, he absorbs them. His first words are almost drowned by the lingering echoes of Kerr's rally cry. Yet the tone shifts instantly. Roumie doesn't raise his voice. He tells a story about washing the feet of strangers, about compassion as an act of rebellion. He speaks of immigrants who built new lives by faith, of families who carry more hope than hate. His words fall softly, but they land deep. The cameras cut between them, the firebrand who equates faith with conquest, and the artist who believes its power lies in surrender. The contrast is cinematic heat versus light. The narrator returns, steady and reflective. Two men of faith, two visions of power, one preaching conquest, the other compassion. In the front rows, reactions divide like currents meeting in the sea. Some lean forward, nodding with fierce approval for Kerr's strength. Others close their eyes, letting Roumie's gentler message wash over them. Somewhere between the two stages, between the banners and the silence, the question begins to take form: which version of faith will define this generation? By late afternoon, rumors whisper through the halls. The schedule says both men will appear together on a final discussion panel. Staff members exchange uneasy looks. Producers sense what's coming. Journalists already have their titles drafted. It won't just be an interview. It will be a reckoning. The narrator's tone drops to a low hum, so when their paths crossed that afternoon, it wasn't just a meeting. It was an ideological collision. The final image lingers on the crowd settling into their seats, not knowing they are seconds away from witnessing something that will loop across every social feed in the country. But before the cameras caught that viral exchange, before the world heard the question that froze the room, one of these men had already been preparing, for years, for the moment when conviction would be tested by conscience. Long before the stadium lights and the roaring crowds, Caleb Kerr was just a college sophomore with a microphone and a mission. He spoke on folding tables outside the library, calling his audience the remnant. His voice carried the certainty of youth mixed with the rhythm of revival. Even then, he didn't want to persuade, he wanted to command. A decade later, the same certainty had become an empire. Television appearances, conferences, podcasts with titles that sounded like battle cries. His brand of belief was simple: if faith was losing influence, then it needed to fight harder. He called it the America First Gospel, a promise that heaven and homeland were two halves of the same covenant. Video clips flash across the montage. Kerr, behind a podium, sleeves rolled, fire in his eyes. "Faith means strength, not surrender," he bellows. Another clip. "Our problem isn't too much pride, it's not enough conviction." Louder applause, chants. Every phrase lands like a drum beat. He learns to time his pauses perfectly. One heartbeat of silence before the roar. He smiles as the echo feeds him. The stage becomes a pulpit, the pulpit becomes a throne. The narrator's voice floats over the scene. To his followers, he's a warrior for God. To his critics, a salesman of division. Still, there's no denying the power of his presence. He knows exactly how to make the camera adore him. Chin lifted, shoulders squared, the practiced gesture of humility that somehow feels rehearsed. Every shot looks like a poster. Every rally a sermon. The crowds adore the simplicity. He offers them a world divided neatly into saints and sinners, patriots and heretics. He tells them doubt is weakness, compassion is compromise. Jesus wasn't soft, he declares in one clip. He flipped tables. He wasn't woke. He was awake. The audience rises to its feet, convinced that righteousness is loud, not gentle. But in quiet moments, the ones between applause, something flickers behind his confident smile. The cameras rarely catch it, a momentary searching, as if he's asking himself whether he still believes every word he's selling. In interviews, when asked about critics who accuse him of politicizing faith, he grins and leans forward. If truth makes you uncomfortable, he says, maybe you're on the wrong side of it. The crowd laughs, relieved that their champion never flinches. His team knows the choreography, by heart. Cue the anthem, cue the scripture quote, cue the fireworks of certainty. Yet even perfection leaves shadows. One aide recalls catching him backstage, head bowed, whispering a prayer that sounded more like negotiation than devotion. "Use me," he murmured. "Just don't let me lose." He never told that story publicly, of course. The power preacher couldn't be seen wrestling with doubt. His image depended on momentum, and momentum despised hesitation. Still, there are moments when the armor clanks. When an interviewer misquotes scripture, and he stumbles to correct it. When a veteran in the audience asks how anger fits into grace, and he pivots back to slogans. Each time he feels the fragility under the facade. But fragility doesn't trend. Fury does. And so he keeps feeding the flame, one rally at a time. The film montage slows Kerr standing before massive LED screens, his face mirrored 10 stories high. The crowd chants his name, the music swells. He points upward, invoking both heaven and the homeland, merging them into a single image of destiny. Narration again. He preached that faith was not for the meek, that surrender was sin, that power itself was proof of divine favor, and the people believed him, because it felt good to believe that victory was holy. Cameras flash, capturing him mid-shout, eyes blazing like a prophet carved from lightning. It is the image that will appear on magazine covers, fundraising emails, and memes proclaiming, "Stand firm like Kerr." He looks untouchable, radiant, the embodiment of conviction without consequence. But somewhere beyond the glare of the spotlights, another voice is rising, a quieter one, patient and steady, preaching not conquest but compassion. And though he doesn't know it yet, their paths are set on a collision course neither can escape. He believed he was untouchable. But that belief was about to be tested in front of millions. Because the man he would confront wasn't a politician. He wasn't even a preacher. He was an actor whose quiet portrayal of mercy had already reached more souls than any sermon could claim. Before the lights, before the scripts, before anyone recognized his face, Jonathan Roumie was a man trying to keep his faith alive in a city that often confused belief with branding. He grew up in a small apartment above a bakery, where the smell of bread always reminded him of prayer. His parents taught him that faith wasn't about proving anything, it was about how gently you could hold the world. When friends dreamed of fame, Jonas dreamed of usefulness, of being the kind of person whose work made others breathe easier. Hollywood did not reward gentleness. He auditioned for 100 roles and lost 99. Casting agents told him he was too earnest, as if sincerity were a liability. He smiled anyway. Between gigs, he drove rideshares, voiced cartoons, played a waiter in one forgettable commercial. Each time he left a set, he whispered the same quiet promise. "When the right story finds me, let it help someone." Years later, that story appeared in the form of a small independent series about a carpenter's son. The producers called it The Chosen Path. The budget was small, the faith behind it enormous. Jonas almost turned it down, afraid of playing someone people prayed to. But something in the script disarmed him. It wasn't about miracles or spectacle, it was about compassion given without conditions. He accepted the part, praying that he could disappear inside it. When the show premiered online, the reaction stunned everyone. Viewers wrote letters describing how his quiet eyes made them feel seen. Some said it reminded them that kindness still had a voice. The series grew from whispers to a worldwide chorus. Reporters called Jonas an overnight success. He laughed softly at the phrase. The overnight had lasted 15 years. Fame crept toward him like an uninvited guest. Paparazzi waited outside churches. Fans called him the man who played God. Each headline made him uneasy. "I'm an actor?" he told interviewers, not an answer. In private, he prayed that the role wouldn't turn him into an idol. He never wanted to be worshipped, only to remind people what love looks like. So he kept his habits: simple morning prayer, long walks, handwritten thank you notes. When fans recognized him, he'd stop, listen to their stories, and often end by asking their names so he could pray for them later. It wasn't performance, it was his way of staying human in a business that rewarded pretending. There are photos of him kneeling beside a homeless veteran, both laughing about a shared joke, of him visiting a children's hospital, reading stories instead of quoting scripture. The images spread online with captions like "Faith without walls." To his supporters, he was proof that humility could trend. But not everyone was charmed. Some accused him of being soft, of turning faith into therapy instead of truth. Others said he should use his platform to fight. Jonas heard the noise but refused to answer it. If they need to shout, he told a friend, maybe they're the ones still searching for peace. The narrator's voice threads through the quiet montage. In a culture shouting for attention, he became a voice of stillness. That stillness, however, carried weight. It drew admiration and suspicion. Religious leaders invited him to conferences, sometimes to celebrate him, sometimes to test him. Each invitation forced him to decide whether presence was endorsement or opportunity. When the organizers of the Faith and Freedom Conference called, he hesitated. He'd heard of the event. Grand stages, political banners, fiery declarations. It was not his world. Yet the invitation's final line caught him. "We need a message of compassion this year." He prayed for a day before accepting. His friends warned him what he was walking into. "They'll try to make you pick a side," one said. Jonas smiled. "I already have a side," he replied. "It's just shaped like a circle." The morning of his speech, he arrived hours early and walked the empty aisles. He whispered a quiet blessing over every seat, asking that whoever sat there would feel a little less afraid when they left. When stagehands asked for last-minute requests, he said only, "Keep the lights gentle." That same afternoon, across the hall, Caleb Kerr rehearsed his own message. A thunderous call to arms, bright with conviction and pride. Their names appeared back to back on the schedule, as if destiny itself had arranged the lineup. For Jonas, it was another talk about mercy. For the audience, it would become something else entirely. The contrast could not have been sharper, one man preaching victory, the other whispering grace. One drew strength from applause, the other from silence. As the conference crowd poured in, journalists whispered that the pairing was deliberate, fire and water on the same stage. The rumor stirred anticipation, the kind that tightens every breath before a storm. Backstage, Jonas closed his eyes. The music from Kerr's rally next door shook the walls, but he focused on his heartbeat, on the soft pulse that reminded him he was alive, not performing. When a producer knocked to signal 2 minutes until his appearance, he nodded. 2 minutes, he said quietly, to remember why any of this matters. He stepped toward the curtain, unaware that beyond it thousands of people and countless cameras were waiting not just for a speech, but for a contrast so sharp it would ripple across the country. So when the Faith and Freedom Conference invited him to speak, right after Caleb Kerr, no one expected the tone of heaven and earth to clash on the same stage. And when it did, it was more than a disagreement, it was a revelation. The panel stage gleamed beneath the harsh light, 3 chairs in a neat row, microphones glinting like unsheathed blades. The banner above them read "Faith and Freedom, One Nation Under God," and the hum of anticipation vibrated through the air like static before a storm. Caleb Kerr entered first, buoyed by applause. He fed on sound, it was his element. He waved, smiled, shook hands with the moderator, then took his seat like a king settling onto a familiar throne. His posture screamed confidence. The crowd responded with chants of his name. Then Jonathan Roumie walked out. No fanfare, no swagger. He simply nodded to the audience and sat. The difference was immediate. One drew attention, the other steadied it. Cameras clicked as though trying to capture that invisible tension forming between them. The moderator began with polite questions about faith in a divided culture, but Kerr barely waited for the second sentence. He leaned forward, seizing the microphone. "You know," he said, his tone light but loaded, "a lot of us worry that the faith portrayed in entertainment these days has gone soft. Don't you think it's time we stop apologizing for strength? Shouldn't faith be a fight?" Gasps rippled across the hall. A few cheered, others shifted in their seats. Roumie looked up, his expression unreadable. He didn't answer. He didn't even blink. The silence stretched until it felt like another participant had joined the panel. The stillness itself. The narrator's voice cuts through the hush. In that pause, the room forgot how to breathe. Kerr filled the void with another volley. Because let's be honest, compassion's great, but without courage, it's weakness. We're not called to cower, are we? We're called to win. Applause erupted again. He smiled, satisfied. The rhythm was his, he'd regained the stage. Roumie still didn't respond. He folded his hands and listened. That simple act, listening, began to unnerve even those cheering. The moderator glanced nervously from one to the other, sensing the energy shifting but not sure why. Kerr pressed on, voice rising. "Tell me, Jonas," he said, the friendliness thinning, "if we don't fight for faith in politics, who will? Or do you think kindness alone can save a nation?" The audience murmured. Camera flashes strobed across the stage. The moderator's lips parted to intervene, but curiosity overrode caution. Everyone wanted to know what the quiet man would finally say. Roumie's faint smile returned, calm as the eye of a hurricane. His gaze met Kerr's, not defiant, not timid, simply present. A woman near the front whispered, "He's praying." Another voice somewhere in the balcony whispered back, "He's deciding." The narrator again. To some, it looked like hesitation. To others, it looked like grace taking its time. Kerr tilted his head, feigning patience but radiating irritation. He gestured toward the crowd, raising the stakes. "See, this is what I mean," he called. "We've got leaders who can't even answer!" The world's burning, and they're busy meditating. Laughter burst from his section of supporters. He basked in it, holding his mic aloft like a torch. Then the laughter faltered, because Jonas Roumie began to speak. Softly. The first word barely reached the microphone, yet somehow every ear caught it. His tone wasn't defensive. It wasn't even rhetorical. It was invitational, like he was opening a door no one realized was there. He leaned forward, eyes steady, and delivered a single sentence. 7 words that sliced through the noise like sunlight through smoke. The crowd froze. The moderator's pen dropped from her hand. Cameras kept rolling, but the energy had changed. The chant that once filled the room had turned into silence so thick it felt sacred. Somewhere in the back, someone whispered, "What did he just say?" Kerr blinked, searching for a comeback, but none arrived. Every rehearsed line dissolved. Roumie didn't repeat himself. He didn't need to. The meaning of those words unfolded in the stillness, wave by wave, until the audience no longer knew whose side they were on. Then Jonas Roumie leaned forward, looked Caleb Kerr in the eye, and said 7 words that would change the tone of the conference forever. Those 7 words became the line that broke the internet. For a heartbeat after Jonas Roumie spoke, the world seemed to stop turning. 7 words, quiet, simple, unarmed. Faith isn't a weapon, it's a witness. They drifted through the hall like a bell tone in an empty cathedral, soft yet unignorable. No thunder, no theatrics, just truth landing where shouting had failed. At first there was only the sound of air conditioners humming, then the faint scrape of a chair. Someone exhaled. A few in the front row exchanged glances as if to confirm they'd heard right. Then, one pair of hands clapped, another joined. A ripple became a tide. Applause swelled, not like a rally's roar, but like waves rising toward shore, slow, certain, reverent. People stood without realizing it. Some smiled through tears, others pressed palms to hearts. The ovation grew until the cameras began to shake on their tripods. Across the stage, Caleb Kerr sat motionless, microphone lowered. The spotlight caught a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, the first crack in his performance armor. He forced a grin, but it faltered halfway. Narration, in that instant, conviction met conscience, and conscience did not blink. Roumie waited until the applause ebbed into breath. He spoke again, his voice a calm current against the lingering tremor of noise. "You speak of strength," he said, turning slightly toward Kerr, "and you're right. Faith requires it. But not the strength to dominate, the strength to love when it costs you pride, the strength to forgive when it's easier to condemn." The crowd quieted completely. Even the security guards by the doors leaned in. He continued, "The teacher I follow washed the feet of those who would betray him. That isn't weakness. It's authority choosing humility. If our message becomes a battle cry, we stop bearing witness and start building walls." Each sentence fell with surgical precision, slicing through slogans and sound bites. A young woman in the audience wiped her cheeks. A pastor clasped his hands as if remembering something long forgotten. Yet in the corner, a few faces tightened, uncomfortable, unwilling to yield. Kerr shifted in his chair, tugging at his collar. He tried to reclaim rhythm. But we are in a fight, he insisted, leaning forward. A cultural war. Roumie nodded gently. Yes, a war against fear, and we don't win it by becoming what we fear. The moderator's eyes widened. It wasn't confrontation anymore. It was revelation unfolding live. Narration, the words pierced through the armor of politics and reached what politics could never touch. The quiet space where belief still listens. Cut to cinematic montage, camera flashes burst, hands rise, screens across the nation light up with live stream hearts and emojis. Someone tweets, "Did Jonathan Roumie just end culture, war politics on stage?" Another posts, "Faithy fear." Within minutes, those 7 words become a hashtag. Back on stage, Kerr's restlessness grows visible. He drums his fingers on the armrest, glances toward the teleprompter, searches for footing. The rhythm he commands at rallies isn't responding here. Each attempt at rebuttal sounds smaller against the stillness Roumie has conjured. Roumie doesn't gloat. He simply speaks as though he's addressing not a crowd, but a single searching soul. "We've confused loudness with light," he says. But light doesn't shout. It reveals. If the way we defend our faith drives people away, maybe we've stopped defending faith and started defending ourselves. The camera cuts between faces, a veteran wiping a tear, a college student recording on her phone, a child whispering to his mother. He sounds like the stories you read me. Narration, for the first time that day, the audience wasn't choosing silence. They were choosing silence. The kind that listens for truth. Roumie looks out over the crowd. "I'm not here to win arguments," he says softly. "I'm here to remember why we believe it all." He sets the microphone down, but his voice still carries. "If our faith divides us, maybe we've forgotten who we're following." The hall holds its breath. Then, as if obeying an unseen cue, the entire room rises. Applause surges, not frenzied, but unified, like a cathedral hymn after confession. Kerr lowers his eyes. The cameras catch at the preacher of power, confronted by a gentler power he can't dismiss. The shot will later become a viral still, the moment the warrior blinked. Narration slows, reverent, and just like that, the applause turned from noise into something sacred. Reporters scramble to capture quotes, but words fail. The headline hasn't yet written itself. It trembles in the air between conviction and change. Roumie steps back, offering a small bow to the crowd. His humility seems to widen the space rather than shrink it. People reach out instinctively, phones lifted not to gawk, but to remember. In the live stream chat, comments race by faster than the moderators can pin them. He just rewrote the playbook. This is what faith is supposed to sound like. 7 words, that's all it took. A camera pans to the back of the hall where volunteers are crying quietly. One of them whispers, "I came here to defend my side, and now I don't even want sides." Narration outside, the evening sun pours through the conference center windows, gold and forgiving. For a fleeting moment, it feels like grace itself has decided to attend. Kerr stands, microphone dangling. He opens his mouth, but the applause drowns whatever he might have said. He forces a smile and nods to Roumie, who returns it, not in triumph, but in peace. That image, the handshake that wasn't planned, flashes across every feed within minutes. Analysts call it a mic drop miracle. As the stage lights dim, the narrator offers the final cadence, no sermon, no slogan, just a sentence that reminded the faithful that strength isn't measured by volume, but by mercy. And when the crowd finally disperses, still whispering the 7 words, something lingers in the air, an aftertaste of truth. But that was only the beginning, because what happened online after that moment was unlike anything the conference had seen before. By nightfall, the clip was everywhere. 17 seconds of silence, 7 words of grace, and 1 stunned expression frozen in the camera's flash. It hit social media like a lightning strike. Someone posted it with the caption, "When compassion wins the room." Within an hour, it had 1 million views. By morning, it was on every platform imaginable, spliced into reaction videos, sermon intros, and think pieces debating whether faith had just witnessed its own reboot. Headlines bloomed across digital front pages. Faith meets fire. Jonas Roumie's 7 words stopped the culture war cold. Care vis Roumie, who spoke for God. When stillness outshouts the shouters. Clips of the conference replayed in endless loops. Kerr's jaw tightening, Roumie's gentle pause, the crowd's eruption. Memes appeared within hours. One showed Roumie as a calm sea beside a storm-tossed ship labeled politics. Another quoted the line in elegant script over a backdrop of stained glass, "Faith isn't a weapon, it's a witness." Every reaction said more about the person posting it than about the clip itself. Supporters of Charlie Kirk called it a setup, a theatrical ambush meant to humiliate him. They flooded comment sections with anger, claiming the audience had been stacked, that the applause was staged. Their videos crackled with energy, righteous, defensive, loud. Jonas Roumie's followers, by contrast, shared the moment like a prayer. They called it the miracle mic drop. Some played it on repeat, writing captions like, "This is what grace sounds like." Churches played it before Sunday services. Teachers used it in classrooms. A rabbi in New York quoted it in a sermon about interfaith humility. The more the internet debated, the more the original moment seemed to grow. It wasn't just a quote anymore. It was a mirror. Everyone who looked saw their own reflection of faith staring back. Narration, it spread not like gossip, but like gospel. Even cable pundits couldn't resist. Morning shows debated whether Roumie's words were a rebuke or a revelation. Talk radio hosts mocked them as Hollywood holiness. Late-night comedians remixed the clip with punchlines, but even their laughter carried unease, the kind that hides respect. Meanwhile, Roumie disappeared. No press conferences, no interviews, no victory laps. He returned home to the small studio apartment where the walls were still bare except for a cross made of driftwood. He turned off his phone for a week. Friends told reporters, he's not avoiding anyone, he's praying. Charlie Kirk, however, did the opposite. Within 24 hours, he went live on his own channel, framed by flags and scripture banners, addressing his millions of followers. His voice was sharp, the way a blade shines when it catches light. "They twisted my words," he insisted. "They want to silence conviction. Don't be fooled. This isn't about compassion, it's about control." The chat flooded with applause emojis and fire icons. He raised his voice higher. Each rebuttal video grew more impassioned, more personal. He dissected the moment frame by frame, trying to reclaim power that no longer felt like his. But something strange happened online. The more he shouted, the calmer Roumie's 7 words sounded. The contrast became its own sermon. Viewers began reposting the clip side by side, Kirk's fiery retort on one screen, Roumie's still expression on the other. The captions wrote themselves. Noise vs presence. Volume vs vision. Faith vs fear. Comment sections filled with testimonies from strangers. "I'm rethinking what it means to believe. I showed this to my dad," we cried together. "This man didn't preach, he reminded us." Soon, the quote appeared on t-shirts, coffee mugs, and protest signs. Someone projected it across a downtown cathedral at night, glowing like graffiti from heaven. ITNES. The movement wasn't organized. It simply happened. Narration, the clip had become a compass, spinning wildly towards something purer, quieter, harder to market but impossible to ignore. Through it all, Roumie stayed silent. No tweets, no comment. When a journalist finally found him leaving a small chapel and asked what he thought about being the face of a revolution, he smiled and said, "It's not my face that matters." That line, simple, deflective, luminous, became another headline. The world couldn't decide if he was a saint or a strategist. But beneath the noise, one truth settled deep in the public conscience. There had been a shift, a trembling in the machinery of outrage. For the first time in a long time, people were talking about faith not as ammunition, but as aspiration. And as for the two men who had shared that stage, Caleb Kerr still thundered, his broadcasts fiery as ever, preaching urgency and war. His followers listened, but the energy had changed, the anger felt recycled, echoing inside a chamber that no longer resonated. Jonas Roumie, meanwhile, moved quietly through airports and city streets. People stopped him sometimes, not for autographs, but to whisper, "Thank you." He always answered the same way, "Don't thank me. Just pass it on." Narration: two men walked off that stage, but only one left with peace. And the lesson that followed was one the nation didn't expect. Weeks passed, but the echo of those 7 words refused to fade. Everywhere people gathered, churches, classrooms, cafes, comment threads, they kept returning to that moment. Not because it ended a debate, but because it revealed what debates had forgotten, that faith, at its best, doesn't conquer, it connects. Narration: the clip had become more than a flash of virality. It had become a mirror, forcing a nation obsessed with being right to remember the power of simply being kind. Jonas Roumie never claimed victory. He didn't tour talk shows or release statements. When asked what it felt like to win, he gently corrected them. Faith isn't about winning arguments. It's about changing hearts. That line spread just as quickly as the first. Some wrote it in chalk outside churches, others painted it across protest banners. Youth pastors printed it on posters. Journalists quoted it at the close of editorials that, for once, didn't end in cynicism. Across the internet, testimonies poured in. Digital confessions dressed as comments. "I grew up in church but left because of all the fighting. This made me want to believe again. I watched that clip with my mom. We haven't agreed on anything in years." We both cried. He didn't attack. He invited. I didn't know faith could feel like that. The algorithm, built for outrage, didn't know what to do with gentleness. And yet the numbers soared. Millions watched not for conflict, but for calm. They replayed the pause, that sacred silence before Roumie spoke, trying to feel what the room must have felt in that instant of awakening. Narration: for once, it wasn't about sides, it was about souls remembering themselves. Meanwhile, Caleb Kerr's live streams continued, fiery, certain, defiant. But something had shifted in his audience. Their cheers were slower, their comments more uncertain. Some began quoting Roumie's line back to him, asking hard questions about humility and purpose. Kerr would bristle, change topics, move on. But the seed was planted, and far from the noise, Roumie kept walking quietly through ordinary life. A phone camera caught him visiting a shelter, kneeling beside a child to help tie a shoelace. Another clip showed him attending a small-town church, anonymous among strangers, singing softly in the back row. When fans approached, he thanked them but reminded them gently, "Don't follow me. Follow the love." It wasn't performance, it was consistency. The rarest sermon of all. Narration: in a world addicted to proof, he offered presence. In a culture of reaction, he offered reflection. One evening, during a podcast roundtable about the state of faith, a political analyst said, "Maybe we've mistaken noise for relevance. Maybe what people are hungry for is reverence." The others nodded. The clip of that conversation went viral too, looping back into the same digital bloodstream that had started it all. People began calling it the Roumie effect. The quiet revolution of tone. Churches reported surges in attendance not driven by fear, but by longing. Online forums that had been battlegrounds began hosting threads where people apologized, shared stories, asked to start over. One tweet captured it best. He didn't silence the room. He unburdened it. Narration: maybe that's what faith had been missing all along. Not a louder argument, but a softer heart. In interviews months later, scholars would say that the confrontation marked a cultural hinge, a moment when conversation remembered compassion. But for Jonas Roumie, it was never about making history. When someone told him he had changed the world, he smiled and said, "No, the world just remembered itself." And somewhere, in that remembering, the noise finally began to fade. Because sometimes the loudest sermon isn't shouted from pulpits or screens. Sometimes the loudest sermon is silence that speaks truth. And that's why this story is more than viral. It's vital. Soft strings rise beneath the final images, faces from the crowd, candlelight flickering, a world still turning but somehow quieter than before. Narration returns, steady and reverent. 2 weeks ago, one confrontation changed everything. Today, the conversation continues. Clips rewind in slow motion. The moment of silence, the 7 words, the standing ovation. The camera lingers not on Jonathan Roumie or Charlie Kirk, but on the audience of strangers united by stillness. Narration. When arrogance meets humility, humility wins. Not because it shouts louder, but because it endures longer. Because light doesn't fight darkness, it reveals it. And in revealing, it heals. The music swells, warm and human, scenes of people sharing the quote, helping neighbors, bowing their heads in reflection. Each image glows with the quiet rhythm of renewal. Narration continues. This isn't just a story about one man or one stage. It's about all of us. Every person brave enough to believe that compassion still counts, that grace still matters, that faith is more than the noise around it. The strings deepen, a heartbeat pulse fades beneath them. So if this moment moved you, the voice says gently, don't let it fade with the screen. Carry it forward, speak truth with kindness, lead with mercy, and let your presence be proof that light still lives among us. A final pause, calm, luminous. If you believe faith can still heal, don't just watch. Be the reason it does. The screen fades to white. The music holds a note just long enough for silence to answer back. Then, softly, the words appear: subscribe, share, shine.